You think you can just drive around here like you belong? That was the kind of arrogance Officer Ryan Cole carried, the kind that made him believe a calm black woman behind the wheel was nothing more than a problem waiting to be corrected, never imagining she was the one person who could bring his entire precinct crashing down within minutes. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The late afternoon sun stretched long across the quiet suburban streets of Westbridge, Illinois, painting the sidewalks in warm amber tones as the day slowly folded into evening. It was the kind of neighborhood where everything appeared orderly on the surface. Trimmed hedges, parked sedans, the distant hum of lawnmowers fading into the background. Angela Brooks moved through it with quiet precision, her silver sedan gliding smoothly between intersections as if she had driven these roads 1,000 times before. Her posture behind the wheel was upright but relaxed, hands resting lightly at 10 and 2, eyes scanning not just the road ahead, but the subtle rhythms of the environment around her. There was nothing hurried about her, nothing uncertain. To anyone passing by, she looked like exactly what she appeared to be, a woman heading home after a long day, blending seamlessly into the fabric of the neighborhood. But there was something in the stillness of her expression that hinted at something deeper, something disciplined. She noticed everything. The way a curtain shifted in a second-floor window, the reflection of headlights turning too slowly at the corner, the faint echo of tires behind her that did not quite match the normal flow of traffic. Years of experience had trained her not to ignore those details. Still, she kept her breathing even, her movements deliberate. The radio played softly in the background, a low murmur of voices that she barely registered. Her focus was elsewhere, anchored in awareness rather than distraction. As she approached a four-way stop, she slowed to a complete halt, counting the seconds out of habit before easing forward again. That was when she saw it. Just a flicker at first, red and blue lights reflecting faintly in her rearview mirror before fully igniting into a sharp, unmistakable signal. The patrol car behind her closed the distance with calculated intent, its presence no longer subtle. Angela's eyes met her reflection for the briefest moment, a quiet acknowledgement passing across her face. There was no panic, no visible frustration, only a subtle tightening around her gaze, the kind that came from recognition rather than surprise. She had seen this pattern before. She had lived it more times than she cared to count. With steady hands, she signaled and guided her car toward the shoulder, bringing it to a smooth, controlled stop beneath the shadow of a tall oak tree. The engine idled softly as the world seemed to narrow around her, the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood fading into the background. Angela placed both hands on the steering wheel, fingers spread slightly, her posture composed and unmistakably compliant. Outside, a car passed slowly, its driver glancing over with quiet curiosity before continuing on. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell silent. The driver's side mirror caught the opening of a patrol car door. Heavy footsteps met pavement, deliberate and unhurried, each one carrying the weight of authority that had never been questioned. Until now. Angela did not turn her head. She did not need to. She already knew the kind of man who was walking toward her window. And more importantly, she knew something he did not. Officer Ryan Cole came into view at the edge of Angela's side mirror, his reflection sharpening with each step until the full weight of his presence settled beside her window. He did not rush. Men like him never did. His authority lived in the pause, in the deliberate pace that suggested control long before a single word was spoken. His hand rested near his belt, fingers brushing against the edge of his holster out of habit rather than necessity. His shoulders squared as if the street itself belonged to him. He leaned slightly toward the glass, peering inside without knocking, his eyes moving over Angela with a slow, unapologetic sweep that lingered just long enough to make the judgment clear. "License and registration," he said, his voice flat but edged with something sharper beneath it, something that carried more accusation than routine procedure. Angela did not move immediately, not out of defiance, but precision. She turned her head just enough to meet his gaze through the glass, her expression steady, unreadable. Then, with controlled motion, she reached for her purse, announcing, calmly, "I am reaching for my license." Her tone was even, professional, the kind that gave him no opening, no excuse. But that was exactly what irritated him. Cole's jaw tightened, a small flicker of annoyance passing across his face as he straightened slightly. He was used to hesitation, to nervous hands fumbling under pressure, to voices cracking under the weight of his badge. What he saw instead was composure, and it unsettled him in a way he could not quite explain. "Yeah, I heard you," he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just don't make any sudden moves." The words were standard, but the way he said them was not. There was a hint of challenge in it, like he was daring her to slip, waiting for a reason to escalate. Angela handed over her license with a steady hand. Cole took it between two fingers, barely glancing at it before looking back at her again, as if the document itself mattered less than whatever story he had already decided to tell. "Angela Brooks," he read aloud slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You live around here?" The question hung in the air, unnecessary and pointed. "Yes," Angela answered simply. Cole tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle he intended to solve by force rather than logic. "Funny," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "I don't remember seeing you around." Angela said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than any response, especially when dealing with men who thrived on reaction. That silence only fueled him further. He took a step back from the window, glancing briefly toward his patrol car before turning back to her, his posture shifting from routine to something more confrontational. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. There was no explanation, no justification, just a command. Angela's fingers tightened slightly against the steering wheel, a subtle movement that did not escape his notice. "Officer," she replied, her voice still calm but firmer now. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" Cole's lips pressed into a thin line, the question landing exactly where it would sting. He leaned in again, closer this time, his presence crowding the space between them. "Because I said so," he answered, each word deliberate. "Now step out of the vehicle." The air between them shifted. What had started as a routine stop was no longer routine. It was something else now, something heavier, something loaded with intent. Angela exhaled slowly, then reached for the door handle, pushing it open with measured control. As she stepped out onto the pavement, the late afternoon sun cast her shadow long across the road, stretching it toward his boots. She stood upright, hands visible at her sides, her posture composed, her gaze level. Cole circled her slowly, eyes scanning her as if searching for something that would justify what he already believed. A passing car slowed again, the driver watching a little longer this time before moving on. "Turn around," Cole ordered. Angela hesitated for the briefest moment, not out of fear but calculation, before complying. The sound of his boots against the pavement grew louder behind her, closer, the distance between authority and action narrowing with each step. And in that moment, with no one stepping in and no one speaking up, Ryan Cole felt completely in control. He had no idea that every second he was pushing this further, he was walking himself straight into something he could not outrun. Ryan Cole stepped in close behind Angela, his presence pressing into her space like a weight meant to force submission rather than ensure safety. "Hands behind your back," he said, his tone losing even the thin layer of professionalism it once carried. There was impatience in it now, a sharp edge that revealed how much he needed control over this moment. Angela did not respond immediately. She turned her head slightly, just enough for her voice to carry clearly without raising it. "Officer, I am cooperating. There is no need for this." Her words were measured, each one placed carefully, not defensive, not emotional, just factual. That, more than anything, seemed to irritate him. Cole let out a quiet scoff, the sound dry and dismissive. "You people always say that," he muttered, just loud enough to sting, not loud enough to be easily challenged. His hand moved to her wrist, gripping it tighter than necessary, pulling it behind her back with a firm, controlling motion. Angela allowed the movement, her body remaining steady, her balance unshaken. The other hand followed, guided into place without resistance. There was no struggle, no sudden movement, only compliance, so complete it felt deliberate. Cole paused for half a second, something in that lack of resistance throwing him off rhythm, but he quickly covered it with force. "Stop resisting," he snapped, though she had done nothing of the sort. The accusation hung in the air, absurd yet dangerous, a justification spoken into existence. The metallic sound of the cuffs closing around her wrists cut through the quiet street, sharp and final. Angela's shoulders remained relaxed, her chin level, her breathing unchanged. Even as the pressure tightened against her wrists, there was no sign of panic, no visible crack in her composure. Cole stepped back slightly, examining his work as if he had just completed something important. "There we go," he said, a hint of satisfaction creeping into his voice. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" Angela turned her head again, meeting his gaze over her shoulder. "What exactly am I being detained for?" she asked. The question was simple, direct, and it landed harder than any raised voice could have. Cole's expression hardened. He did not like questions he could not easily answer. "Suspicious behavior," he replied quickly, almost too quickly, as if the words had been waiting for a moment like this. "You fit a description." Angela's eyes held on him for a moment longer, searching not for answers, but for truth. She found neither. "Still," she nodded once, a small, controlled motion that acknowledged his words without accepting them. "Understood," she said quietly. The calm in her voice carried something deeper now, something that hinted at patience rather than submission. Cole did not notice the difference. Or, if he did, he chose to ignore it. He guided her toward the patrol car, his grip firm, almost performative, as if aware of the occasional passing glance from distant drivers. The back door opened with a heavy pull, and he motioned her inside. Angela lowered herself into the seat without hesitation, adjusting her position carefully despite the restraints, her movements precise even in discomfort. The door shut with a solid, echoing thud, sealing her inside. Cole walked around to the driver's side, his steps lighter now, a sense of control settling over him like a reward. He slid into his seat, glanced at her briefly through the rearview mirror, and smirked faintly. "Should have just listened," he said, more to himself than to her. Angela met his gaze in the reflection, her eyes steady, unflinching. She did not respond. She did not need to, because while Ryan Cole believed this moment marked the end of his authority being challenged, Angela Brooks understood something far more important. This was only the beginning. The patrol car pulled away from the curb with a slow, deliberate roll, the quiet neighborhood shrinking behind them as Ryan Cole merged onto the main road without urgency. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere shifted, no longer open, no longer observed, just a confined space where his authority felt absolute. Cole leaned back slightly in his seat, one hand resting loosely on the steering wheel while the other tapped against the center console, a restless rhythm that betrayed the irritation still simmering beneath his surface. In the rearview mirror, Angela Brooks sat upright despite the restraints, her shoulders squared, her gaze steady as it met his reflection without hesitation. That look, calm, unwavering, nagged at him in a way he could not quite articulate. "You know," Cole began, his voice carrying a tone that hovered between mockery and forced casualness, "most people in your position would be a little more cooperative." He let the word hang, glancing back at her again as if expecting some kind of reaction. Angela did not take the bait. "I've been cooperative," she replied evenly, "from the moment you approached my vehicle." Her voice was quiet, but it carried a firmness that refused to bend. Cole let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "That's not how it looks from where I'm sitting," he said, his tone sharpening. You gave me attitude. Question my authority. That's not exactly what I'd call smart." Angela's eyes did not move from the mirror. Asking a question is not a crime. The words landed clean, precise. Cole's jaw flexed. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, his knuckles tightening for just a second before he forced himself to relax. "No," he said slowly, "but suspicious behavior is." He accelerated slightly, the engine responding with a low growl as they approached a traffic light. "And you fit that just fine." Angela shifted slightly in the back seat, adjusting her wrists against the cuffs with controlled movement, minimizing discomfort without drawing attention to it. "Then I would appreciate clarification," she said. "What behavior, specifically, justified this arrest?" Cole exhaled sharply through his nose, a sound edged with impatience. "You were driving slow, looking around, nervous." He paused, then added, "That's enough." Angela's expression did not change, but something in her gaze sharpened like a lens. "Focusing. Or," she said calmly, "you decided before you even approached my car." The statement was not accusatory. It was observational. That made it worse. Cole's head turned slightly, his eyes flicking toward her in the mirror with a flash of irritation that he did not bother to hide this time. "Careful," he warned, his voice dropping lower. "You're already in enough trouble." The patrol car turned into the precinct parking lot, tires crunching lightly against the gravel near the entrance. The building loomed ahead, a block of concrete and glass that reflected the fading sunlight in dull, uneven patches. As Cole pulled into a marked space, he shifted the car into park with a firm motion, as if punctuating the end of the ride. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Then Cole stepped out, circling around to the back door with renewed purpose. He opened it sharply. "Out," he ordered. Angela stepped out carefully, her movements controlled despite the limited range allowed by the cuffs. The station doors stood just a few yards away, officers moving in and out without paying much attention. Just another arrest, just another face. Cole placed a guiding hand on her arm, steering her forward with more force than necessary. "Let's see how calm you stay inside," he muttered under his breath. Angela walked beside him without resistance, her posture unchanged, her gaze forward. If she felt the weight of what was happening, she did not show it. And that quiet, unshaken presence followed them through the precinct doors like a shadow Cole could not shake. The precinct doors closed behind them with a heavy, echoing thud that seemed to seal the outside world away, replacing it with fluorescent lights and the low hum of conversations that carried an undercurrent of indifference. Officer Ryan Cole did not slow his pace as he guided Angela Brooks across the tiled floor, his grip firm, almost possessive, as if he needed everyone watching to understand exactly who was in control. A few officers glanced up from their desks, their eyes lingering just long enough to register the scene before returning to their paperwork. To them, it was routine. Another arrest. Another story they did not need to question. "Processing," Cole said sharply to the desk sergeant, a broad-shouldered man named Miller who barely looked up at first. Picked her up acting suspicious. "Gave me attitude." Miller leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward Angela with a slow, assessing look that carried the same quiet dismissal Cole had shown earlier. "That right?" he asked, his tone flat, uninterested in the details. Angela stood still, her posture straight despite the cuffs, her eyes moving calmly across the room, taking in every exit, every face, every small detail without appearing to focus on any one thing. "I would like to know the exact charge," she said, her voice cutting through the low murmur without rising in volume. Miller let out a faint breath through his nose, something close to amusement. "You'll get your paperwork," he replied, waving a hand dismissively. "Take a seat." Cole did not wait for further instruction. He steered Angela toward a metal bench along the wall, the kind designed more for control than comfort. "Sit," he ordered. Angela lowered herself onto the bench with careful precision, adjusting her balance without complaint. The cold metal pressed through her clothing, but she did not react. Cole stepped back, crossing his arms as he watched her for a moment, as if expecting some shift, anger, fear, frustration. He got none of it. Instead, Angela lifted her gaze to meet his, her expression unchanged. "You are making a mistake," she said quietly. Cole's lips curled into a faint smirk, the kind that fed on dismissal. "Funny," he replied. "That's what they all say." He turned away, walking back toward the desk, his voice rising just enough for others to hear. "Run her information," he said to Miller. "Let's see what she's hiding." Miller nodded lazily, pulling the keyboard closer, his fingers moving without urgency. Angela remained seated, her breathing steady, her eyes now fixed on a point somewhere beyond the room, as if measuring time rather than space. Minutes passed, slow and uneventful on the surface. Cole leaned against the counter, exchanging quiet remarks with another officer, his posture relaxed now, the tension replaced with the easy confidence of a man who believed the situation was already decided. Every so often, his eyes flicked back toward Angela, checking for signs of change. There were none. She sat exactly as she had when she arrived, composed, silent, unmoved. Finally, Miller glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing just slightly before smoothing out again. "Nothing flagged yet," he muttered. Cole shrugged, unconcerned. "Give it time," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he turned back toward Angela, his voice carrying across the room. "You're going to be here a while," he said. "Might want to get comfortable." Angela met his gaze once more, her eyes steady, unyielding. "I will make one phone call," she said, her tone not a request, but a statement grounded in certainty. Cole hesitated for the briefest moment, something in her voice catching him off guard before he dismissed it with a scoff. "Yeah," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "You'll get your call." He turned away again, unaware that the moment he had just granted was not a formality, not a routine step in processing, but the precise point where everything he thought he controlled was about to begin slipping out of his hands. The room settled into a dull rhythm after Angela's request, the kind of quiet that was not peaceful but expectant, like something unseen was drawing closer 1 second at a time. Sergeant Miller slid a basic incident form across the desk toward Cole, tapping the corner of it with a pen. "Go ahead and start the write-up," he said. "Suspicious activity, non-compliance, whatever you want to put. We'll sort it later." Cole picked up the pen, rolling it between his fingers as he glanced over the blank lines waiting to be filled. There was something almost casual in the way he approached it, like this was routine paperwork rather than a decision that would carry consequences. "Yeah," he muttered, pulling the chair out and dropping into it. "Let's make it official." His eyes flicked toward Angela as he began writing, his voice drifting across the room. "Name, Angela Brooks. Detained for suspicious behavior, failure to comply with lawful commands." He paused, tapping the pen against the paper as if considering how far he wanted to push it. "Maybe resisting," he added under his breath, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Across the room, Angela sat exactly as she had before, her posture unchanged, her presence almost detached from the chaos being constructed around her. But there was a shift now, subtle but undeniable. Her gaze lifted, not toward Cole, but toward the clock mounted high on the wall. Each second ticked forward with quiet precision. She stood slowly, the movement controlled despite the cuffs, drawing just enough attention for Cole to glance up again. "You said I could make a call," she reminded him, her voice steady, cutting cleanly through the air. Cole leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose as if the request itself was an inconvenience. "Yeah, I said you could," he replied, dragging the moment out. "Doesn't mean it's happening right this second." Angela held his gaze now, her eyes unwavering. "Officer Cole," she said, using his name for the first time, and something in the way she said it made the room feel smaller, tighter. "I suggest you reconsider how you are handling this situation." The words were not loud. They were not aggressive, but they carried weight, measured, deliberate, and unmistakably intentional. Cole let out a short, dismissive laugh, shaking his head as he pushed back from the desk and stood. "Reconsider," he echoed, stepping toward her again, his boots striking the floor with a heavier rhythm this time. "You really think you're in a position to be giving me advice?" Angela did not step back. She did not raise her voice. "This is your last opportunity to correct a mistake before it becomes something you cannot control," she said. The phrasing was precise, almost surgical, and it hung in the air longer than it should have. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Cole's face. Not doubt, not quite, but a hesitation that he quickly buried beneath a sharper edge of arrogance. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping just enough to feel personal. "Let me make something very clear," he said. "You don't tell me how to do my job. Not here. Not ever." He straightened, turning away from her with a dismissive wave of his hand. "You'll get your call when I decide you get your call." Angela watched him for a moment longer, her expression unreadable, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging a decision that had just been finalized. Cole returned to the desk, grabbing the pen again and pressing it harder against the paper this time, his strokes more aggressive, more certain. He did not look back at her. He did not question the warning. And in that choice, in that quiet, arrogant dismissal, Ryan Cole closed the final door that might have saved him from what was already on its way. The pen in Ryan Cole's hand scratched across the paper with forced confidence, each stroke heavier than the last, as if pressing harder could anchor his version of reality into something permanent. Around him, the precinct carried on in its usual rhythm. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, low conversations blending into a dull background noise. Nothing about the moment felt urgent to anyone else. Nothing except the quiet shift that had already begun. It started with the sound of tires outside. More than one vehicle pulling in fast, controlled, purposeful. The faint echo carried through the glass doors at the front of the station, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Miller's fingers paused over the keyboard. One of the younger officers glanced up, his brow tightening slightly. Cole did not look up. Not yet. Then came the second sound, the sharp, synchronized closing of multiple car doors. Heavy, decisive, not the casual movement of patrol officers returning from a shift, but something coordinated, something deliberate. Angela Brooks lifted her gaze from the clock and turned her head toward the entrance. Her expression did not change, but there was a finality in her stillness now, like a decision reaching its inevitable conclusion. "What the hell is that?" one officer muttered under his breath. Before anyone could answer, the front doors swung open with force. The air inside the precinct shifted instantly as a group of men and women stepped through, their presence cutting through the room with a precision that demanded attention. Dark suits, focused eyes, no hesitation. At the front stood Agent Daniel Hayes, his posture straight, his gaze already locked onto the center of the room. Everything stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chairs stilled. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed sharper in the sudden silence. Cole finally looked up, irritation flickering across his face as he pushed his chair back slightly. "Can I help you?" he called out, his voice carrying a hint of annoyance, as if this interruption was nothing more than a disruption to his paperwork. Hayes did not answer immediately. He stepped forward, his eyes scanning once, quick, efficient, before settling directly on Cole. "Officer Ryan Cole," he said, his voice calm, but carrying across the room with unmistakable authority. The sound of Cole's name landing in that tone, measure precise, caused something in his posture to falter. Just slightly. "Yeah," Cole replied, slower now, his confidence no longer effortless. "That's me." Hayes took another step forward, holding up a badge just long enough for it to register. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words landed like a weight dropped into still water, sending ripples through every corner of the room. Cole blinked once, then again. The smirk that had lingered at the edge of his expression faded, replaced by something far less certain. What is this about?" he asked, his voice no longer steady. Hayes did not look away from him. "You detained someone today," he said. "Angela Brooks." Cole's throat tightened. His eyes flicked, almost involuntarily, toward the bench. Angela was already standing. Even in cuffs, she carried herself differently now. Not because anything had changed, but because everything had finally been revealed. Hayes turned slightly, his gaze shifting to her with immediate recognition. "Ma'am," he said, a subtle nod of respect in his posture. "Apologies for the delay." The room froze. Completely. Cole stared at Angela, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he knew. The calm woman in the back seat. The silent detainee on the bench. The one he had dismissed, mocked, controlled. "Wait, what?" he managed, the words barely forming. Hayes turned back to him, his expression hardening. Angela Brooks, he said, each word deliberate, is a federal operative working under active jurisdiction. The silence that followed was absolute. Cole's face drained of color, the realization hitting not all at once, but in fragments, each one sharper than the last. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The room he had controlled just minutes ago no longer belonged to him. And for the first time since this began, Ryan Cole understood exactly how powerless he really was. Ryan Cole stood frozen, the weight of Agent Hayes' words pressing down on him like something physical, something suffocating. The room that had once echoed with his authority now felt unfamiliar, hostile even, as every pair of eyes shifted, not toward Angela, but toward him. For the first time, he was no longer the one in control of the narrative. He was the center of it. Hayes did not raise his voice, did not step closer in anger. He did not need to. "Remove the cuffs," he said, his tone firm, directed not as a request, but as an expectation that would be met without delay. Cole did not move. His hands hung uselessly at his sides, his mind scrambling for something. An explanation, a defense, anything that could undo what had already been set in motion. "Now," Hayes added, sharper this time. That single word snapped the moment in half. One of the other officers stepped forward, hesitating only briefly before reaching for the key at Cole's belt. The metal clicked as the cuffs were unlocked, falling away from Angela's wrists with a soft but decisive sound. She did not rub her wrists. She did not react at all. She simply stepped forward, reclaiming her space with quiet authority. Cole watched it happen as if from a distance, his own body refusing to respond, his thoughts lagging behind the reality unfolding in front of him. This is a misunderstanding," he finally said, his voice uneven, lacking the sharpness it once carried. "She didn't identify herself. I was just doing my job." Hayes turned his full attention back to him, and this time there was no neutrality left in his expression. "Your job," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words for truth, "is not to fabricate charges, is not to ignore procedure, and it is certainly not to detain a federal operative without cause." Each sentence landed with increasing weight, stripping away the last fragments of Cole's certainty. Sergeant Miller shifted uncomfortably behind the desk, his earlier indifference gone, replaced by a quiet tension that spread through the room like a ripple. No one spoke. No one intervened. They were all watching the same thing happen. The reversal of power, swift and undeniable. Hayes reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded document and holding it up just enough for Cole to see. "We have been monitoring misconduct complaints tied to this precinct," he said. "Today, you made it very easy for us." The words did not need elaboration. Cole's breathing changed, shallow now, uneven. You're blowing this out of proportion," he tried again, but the argument sounded hollow, even to him. Hayes did not respond with words this time. Instead, he gave a small nod to the agents behind him. Two of them stepped forward immediately, their movements precise, controlled. One took hold of Cole's arm, firm but not aggressive. The other reached for his wrists. "What are you doing?" Cole snapped, instinctively pulling back, but the resistance lacked conviction. "You are being detained pending federal investigation," Hayes stated calmly. "Do not make this worse." The irony of the situation settled over the room like a heavy fog. Moments ago, Cole had used those same words, those same tactics, without hesitation. Now, they were being used on him. The cold steel of the cuffs closed around his wrists, the sound unmistakable, final. This time, there was no authority behind it, only consequence. Cole's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, for someone to step in, to question what was happening. No one did. The same silence that had once protected him now condemned him. Angela stood a few feet away, her posture composed, her gaze steady as she watched the scene unfold. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, only quiet resolution. Justice was not loud. It did not need to be. Hayes stepped aside slightly, allowing the agents to guide Cole toward the center of the room, his movements now controlled, directed. The man who had walked in with confidence now struggled to keep his footing, his earlier certainty replaced with something far more fragile. And as the precinct watched, Ryan Cole was led away not as an officer, but as a man who had just lost everything he thought made him untouchable. The sound of the precinct doors closing behind Ryan Cole echoed differently this time, not as a symbol of control, but as the quiet sealing of consequences that could no longer be undone. The agents moved with steady precision, guiding him out of the room without resistance, his earlier defiance now replaced by a hollow silence that followed him like a shadow. Inside, the atmosphere shifted slowly, like a storm that had passed but left its mark on everything it touched. No one returned immediately to their work. No one spoke above a murmur. The weight of what had just unfolded lingered in the air, pressing against every officer who had watched it happen. Sergeant Miller remained behind the desk, his hands resting on the surface where moments ago he had dismissed Angela without a second thought. Now, he did not look at her directly. He could not. Angela Brooks stood where she had been left, her wrists free, her posture unchanged, as if the entire ordeal had simply passed through her without leaving visible damage. Agent Daniel Hayes approached her with a measured step, his expression no longer hardened but respectful, grounded in quiet acknowledgement. "Ma'am," he said, his voice lower now, steady and sincere, "everything from here will be handled. You have our full cooperation." Angela gave a small nod, not dramatic, not triumphant, just acceptance. "I expected nothing less," she replied calmly. There was no need for further explanation. Hayes gestured subtly toward the exit, offering space rather than direction. Angela turned and began to walk, her steps even, unhurried, moving through the same room where she had been treated as powerless only minutes before. This time, the eyes that followed her were different. No longer dismissive, no longer indifferent. There was a quiet recognition now, an unspoken understanding that they had witnessed something irreversible. As she passed the front desk, one of the younger officers straightened slightly, as if instinctively correcting his posture in her presence. No words were exchanged, but the shift was unmistakable. The doors opened for her without hesitation, the evening light outside softer now, calmer, stretching across the pavement in long, golden lines. The same street that had felt confined earlier now seemed open again, unburdened. Angela stepped out into the fading day, inhaling the cool air with steady control, her gaze lifting briefly toward the horizon before settling forward once more. Behind her, the precinct remained standing, but something within it had changed. Systems would be reviewed, reports would be rewritten. Accountability would follow where silence once existed, not because of noise or outrage, but because truth had been revealed with precision at exactly the right moment. Angela walked toward her car, each step carrying the same quiet strength she had shown from the beginning. She did not look back. She did not need to. The work she carried, the responsibility she held, continued beyond this moment, beyond this place. And as the last light of day stretched across the street, there was a sense of balance restored. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the kind of calm certainty that only real justice could leave behind. There is something quietly revealing about the way power behaves when it believes no one is watching. Officer Ryan Cole did not wake up that morning expecting his authority to be tested, but that was never the real issue. The issue was how easily he mistook control for truth, how quickly he filled in the gaps of what he did not understand with assumptions that made him feel certain. Angela Brooks, on the other hand, never needed to raise her voice or assert her identity to hold power. She understood something deeper, that real authority does not rush to prove itself, and real strength does not react to every provocation. What unfolded inside that precinct was not just a reversal of roles. It was a collision between illusion and reality. Cole believed his badge defined the limits of the world around him. But in a matter of minutes, those limits collapsed under the weight of accountability. And what remains after that kind of collapse is not just consequence, but clarity. A reminder that systems are only as strong as the integrity of the people within them. And when that integrity fails, the correction, though quiet, is absolute. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.